Good morning. My name is Jess Sweeney, and along with my fellow co-founder, Mia Eckes, I'm happy to welcome all of you on behalf of Wellspring, a Mother Artist project. I'd like to take a moment to thank all of our wonderful co-sponsors whose support helped make this event possible. Image Journal, the Collegium Institute for Catholic Thought and Culture, Dappled Things Magazine, and St. Gregory's Hall. And we'll share more about this at the end, but Image Journal has graciously shared an opportunity for everyone who's here and who's registered to receive a free copy of their current journal volume. So we'll be sure to pass that info on to you towards the end and in an email afterwards.
Yes.
Hand it off to Mia here.
Yeah, Jess and I co-founded Wellspring last year, and we're very much still in the grassroots stages of our collective. So we're so grateful to have all of you here today to gather with us and just seek a moment of rest and refreshment amidst the busyness of our Tuesday morning. As a collective, we believe that to flourish creatively, mother artists, that is, mothers pursuing this double vocation of the creative life and motherhood, need moments of rest and contemplation, community, and freedom supported within their process. We seek to support and nurture women as they answer this calling, and to do so in community with the flame of faith alive, and as part of a tradition of other mother artists of the past, like Dorothy Day, Artemisia Gentileschi, Sigrid Undset, Madeline L'Engle, and so forth. And we do this one word, one brushstroke, one note, one stitch at a time, amidst the beauty and the messiness of the motherhood journey.
And today's conversation will be essentially a dive into this deep well, exploring what it means to be a mother and an artist or a creative of any kind and a woman of faith across mediums and at different stages of the mothering journey. From the intellectual underpinnings, which frame the way we conceptualize this integration, to the practical everyday rhythms, which craft each small step of this beautiful and sometimes painful journey of life. The creative life, but even more so, I think, the mothering life, can be marked by extremes. The utter delight and wonder of seeing the little person that's growing before you, and also the sort of the feeling of being expanded sometimes to the point of breaking. And yet through making and through the life of the spirit, we are held together, or hope that we can be. And we can sometimes touch up with the divine, a kind of sense of wholeness and peace even in those moments. And even as we swing back into a sort of chaotic moment. But in those glimmers and reminders, they help us to recall the words of Julian of Norwich: all shall be well, and all shall be well, and all manner of things shall be well. And so today, we are joined by four women. They are four mothers, four creatives who are each journeying. Before we hear from each of them, we'll introduce them briefly and then hand things off to them. So we'll kind of introduce all four speakers and then we will hand them off. So Amy Alznauer is the winner of the Annie Dillard Award for Creative Nonfiction and the Christopher Award. And she is the author of several award-winning children's books, including The Strange Birds of Flannery O'Connor. She is working on the publication of Mistaken Identity, the young O'Connor's own children's book, and is one of the curators for the forthcoming 2023 Flannery O'Connor, Benny Andrews, and Alice Walker exhibit at Emory University. She teaches mathematics courses at Northwestern University and is the mother of two.
Sarah Hempel Irani has been sculpting expressive figures in clay, bronze, and stone for over 20 years. Originally from Michigan, she moved to Maryland to apprentice with the former artist in residence at the Washington National Cathedral. She creates sculptures for public spaces, such as her 7'6" bronze monument to fashion icon Claire McCardle. She sculpts for religious organizations, gardens, as well as private collections, and has been a visiting artist and speaker at universities, religious institutions, and civic organizations. She became a mom via adoption in 2009.
Amy Bornman is a poet, artist, and parent living in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. She is the author of There is a Future, published by Paraclete Press Poetry, and the co-author of How to Sew Clothes, published this spring by Abrams Books. Her second book of poetry, Broken Waters, is forthcoming from Fernwood Press this summer. Amy designs sewing patterns for her small business, All Well Workshop. Her poems have appeared in places like Image Journal, Ecstasis Magazine, The Windhover, and Windfall Room.
And Sarah Hart is a mother and seeker of little signs and miracles everywhere. Sarah is an award-winning songwriter, and her spirit of joy and love for teaching have touched the lives of thousands. Along with her Grammy-nominated performing and songwriting, including for other artists like Amy Grant, Celtic Woman, and Matt Maher, she has composed music for various audiobooks and animated tales, such as for Carson Ellis's Do It's Talk, and even some musicals, among them for beloved Polish children's book, Kajtek the Wizard. And her first original musical is about Bernadette of Lourdes.
So I'll now be handing things off to our four guests, who will each give some short opening remarks of about 10 minutes or so, and we'll be beginning with Amy Alznauer. And when all four have finished, we'll then come back together for conversation that Mia and I will moderate, and we'll then end by opening up the floor to questions from all of you in attendance. And just so you know, you can feel free to start sending questions at any time throughout the event using the Q&A section at the bottom of your screen. And while we won't be able to get to everyone's questions, we hope to get to as many as we can. So now I'll hand things off to Amy Alznauer.
Thank you so much, Jess and Mia. I'm just really honored to be here and grateful that you asked me to be a part of this panel. It came at a really great time for me, a moment of big transition between previous projects and future projects. So I've really loved the chance to gather my thoughts around this topic. So I'm going to share my screen and start up this PowerPoint. Okay, so I am going to be speaking to this topic, the vocations of motherhood, art, and faith, and how these have really grown together in an organic way for me around very specifically vocation itself, which has become a deep theme for me. So I want to start out by just talking a little bit about how I look at vocation. So there's a beautiful quotation by the poet Anne Carson. She wrote, "Since ancient times, pilgrimages have been conducted from place to place in the belief that," and here's the key part, "in the belief that a question can travel into an answer as water into thirst." So I love thinking of vocation as being a pilgrimage that starts at the beginning of life and travels through one's entire life. And that the mechanism or the driving force of that pilgrimage is thirst or questions. And if you're able to listen through your life, that there will be a natural organic movement of that question, like water flowing into various answers, right? So the answers, when we have a question that's as big as a lifetime, the answers are also going to be full, but in some very natural way connected. So what I brought, so I want to take you back to the beginning of my writing when I think my sort of natural themes began to emerge. So I wanted to be a writer all my life, but I really started writing in earnest when I was getting an MFA in creative writing. I was in a nonfiction program, so writing kind of lyric essays, et cetera. And this is a picture on the screen of a tortoise that was a playground tortoise that was in the playground that I could see from my bedroom window in the house I lived in till I was 10 years old. We were on the cul-de-sac and I could look across that cul-de-sac into this big park, and this tortoise was there. And this tortoise became sort of an imaginative timekeeper for me because I would go back to the park throughout the years, even as an adult. So I'm just going to share a tiny little excerpt from one of my essays. Suddenly, oh, there we go. I threw my leg, so this is on one of my returns. I threw my leg over her, the tortoise's neck, and pushed myself up onto her back. And then everything started to feel like a repetition of what always happens when I return. I run my fingers along the grooves of her shell. I look back across the cul-de-sac to the windows of the ranch house at the edge of the grass. It is so easy to imagine that my young life still fills that house. I can almost make out the face of the girl I once was peering back at me through the window. I used to sit on my bed, face pressed into the screen, smelling its dust and weather, and imagine my future and what I would one day be. And around us both, I feel the skin of an old woman forming, lying wrinkled and loose over our hands and neck, our young bones caught within her tired ones. It is really for this moment that I always return to the park, to sit there with them, our bones within bones, our minds within minds. So very early on, I started being obsessed with the theme of time, and not just time, but how our previous beings give birth or give rise to our future selves, and how there is a gathering of all of that life into one. So of course, when I had children, this feeling was amplified because now, not only observing it in myself, I was caught, as all people are, between their parents and their children. So they have this visceral experience of gathered time, of being a daughter with respect to one's mother, and then having a daughter, et cetera. So early on in my children's years, as many of us do, as many of us on this panel probably have done or are doing, I contemplated homeschooling and have dipped in and out of that during the course of my children's lives. And one quotation really stuck with me by Susan Schaefer Macaulay, I think, because it was touching on this deep question in my own life. She wrote this: try a simple experiment. Take a small child on your knee. Respect him. Do not see him as something to prune, form, or mold. This is an individual who thinks, acts, and feels. He is a separate human being whose strength lies in who he is, not in who he will become. And then fast forward to when my daughter was about 8 or 9, she fell in love with Jane Eyre, and I read that with her. And of course, now from the child's perspective, I can't help but connect these two quotations. So Jane Eyre says, "Do you think because I am poor, obscure, plain, and little, I am soulless and heartless? I am no bird, and no net ensnares me. I am a free human being with an independent will." And I love that description of a child who really, in some sense, meets those criteria of being small and obscure, and yet not necessarily, and yet they have this full heart and this full soul. And then summing it all up is just this very short line by Charlotte Mason: children are born persons. So putting that together with this theme that was already very much present in my thinking, around the same time, when my children were maybe around 6, I started writing children's books. And so I want to take you very briefly through 3 of my books, just these key moments to show you how this sort of obsession, fascination, these questions appear in those books as well. So I love the way Toni Morrison formulates her work. She says that she's doing a literary archaeology. She journeys to a site of memory to see what remains were left behind. And I very much see my work in children's picture book biographies as being that kind of work. So I'm not going to have time to tell you the story, so you'll just get like a little hint of it from what I am going to share. So at the beginning of this story, the little boy's mother says to him, "Before you were even born, the goddess Namagiri leaned down and whispered in your grandmother's ear that someday she would write the thoughts of God on your tongue." Amma gazed into her baby's bright eyes. But how could someone so small ever grow up to say something so big? So now, when did these questions first emerge in this child's life? In the family record books, there is a note saying that 2 of his very first questions were, what is the distance between clouds, and who was the first man in the world? And so I rendered that. What is small, he asked. He imagined the world with only one man before anyone was there to hear him speak. And what is big? He looked up at the big blue space between clouds. Now, these original questions become questions, big and small, about numbers. And of course, that carries him into all sorts of work as a mathematician. And eventually, it allows him to take one small step away from his homeland onto this big steamer and sail across the ocean into the rest of his life. The next book is a story of these 2 brothers. And again, we have a grandmother at the start of the story, and she's telling him stories of war when her bookstore was destroyed. And he realizes the world is a beautiful and terrible place. But when he's 5 years old, he has a little brother who cries all the time, and he cries so much that he has to cover his ears and hide. And he realizes that a brother too is a beautiful and terrible thing. And then the communist revolution happens, and once again, the bookstore, a symbol of capitalism, is burned to the ground. And he realizes that even art, thought Shaoli in tears, is beautiful and terrible. So take these three layers and now bring them into later periods in their life. And I'm going to read you this one page. Side by side, they worked like two little boys again, painting and fighting. Finally, they stood back to see what they had made. Two figures riding in a little boat on crashing waves. It is like the world and like our lives, said Shaoning. Yes, said Shaoli, terrible and beautiful. And finally, the strange birds of Flannery O'Connor. When she was a little girl, she was on this quest to find the strangest, most beautiful bird. And there is this moment, there's this moment of revelation for her. Flannery had a revelation. People didn't want to see any old chicken. They wanted a weird one. There was something about strangeness that made people sit up and look. And then this quest to find the strangest, most beautiful bird migrates into a quest to write the strangest, most beautiful story. She began writing stories because in stories, you can make things strange as you like. You can make people fly and headless chickens live. And of course, this carries her through her life, these double quests. They're really one quest. And eventually she merges with the birds and the stories. And I have this final scene in the book, which is really a moment of resurrection. And if you stare real hard, you can almost see her rising up and sailing above the world, her silver crutches trailing out like wings, and her blue eyes flashing, the brightest, oddest bird you ever did see. So I want to close with just a quick little summary of those three strands that I'm trying to bring together. So I see my calling, my vocation, this pilgrimage, these questions, answering these three areas of life in motherhood, to recognize and cultivate these innate beings of my children. So really not to mold, but to encourage, to give life to. In art, to search for the origin stories of my characters. So up to now, it's been mostly fiction, or I'm sorry, nonfiction, but now I'm working on fiction. So even with respect to my fictional characters, and in faith, to live first in relationship to that idea of the givenness. Where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth? These questions that are given to us, that are the drivers and shapers in some sense of our soul. And then the more intimate, you created my inmost being, you knit me together in my mother's womb. So with that, I want to hand this over to our next speaker, Sarah Hempel Irani, the amazing sculptor.
Thank you so much, Amy. That was so beautiful and inspiring. It reminds me of a quote that I always say to my daughter. It's from Frederick Buechner. He says, "Here is the world. Beautiful and terrible things will happen. Do not be afraid, for I, the Lord, will be with you." So
that is beautiful.
That's sort of the theme of what I want to talk about in my story. So, so thank you for that. I am going to share my screen now. So here's me. This is where you can find me. And today I want to sort of give a narrative of my life and my work and how motherhood has intersected. And I say that I am always a mother and I'm always an artist. There's no such thing as balancing these two or juggling these two. But I'm going to start with a portrait of the artist as a young woman. I went to school and I studied sculpture and Latin, and I was just in love with the ancient world and with this tradition of being a sculptor. And remember people saying, well, what are you going to do for a job? And I said, well, I'm going to be a sculptor. And I felt really, really called to it. And I grew up in Michigan, and I moved to the suburbs of Washington, D.C. to work as an apprentice. And I really was an optimistic, bold young person, and I had everything before me. After my time as an apprentice, I got this commission to create these two larger than life-size sculptures for a church in Potomac, which is a suburb of Washington, D.C. And here I am at 25 years old, working on this sculpture in clay that would become marble. And here's the finished sculpture at Our Lady of Mercy. And this is an image of the Virgin Annunciate where the angel has just left her. So I spent 2 years working on this and thinking about that moment of incarnation and this moment of calling and God inviting us. And this is Mary's beautiful yes, and resting in her calling. And then I went on to make St. Joseph. Here I am in my garage studio. And I met my husband during this time, and I was sort of laughed. And I said, remember, when you met me, I lived in a garage. And this is where I lived and worked. And I spent many years working on this project. And here's the finished St. Joseph. And here St. Joseph is staring at his hands. And the thing that I have in common with St. Joseph is we both work with our hands. And so he's contemplating the life of the infant Messiah coming into his hands. So I finished these sculptures. I was 30 years old and I was completely burnt out. So what did I do? I went to graduate school and studied medieval and Renaissance art history. I wrote my thesis on the Madonna Misericordia by Piero della Francesca. It was sort of nice to take a break from the studio, but this work was also really intense. And during that time, I had a small studio, and my husband and I decided to adopt a child. And while I was waiting for her, I was, many of my friends were having children and losing children, and there was school shootings. And I was just in this way of entering into motherhood, knowing the beautiful and terrible things that were going to happen. So this was the work that sort of came out during that waiting time. And then I found myself in 2009 at the international arrivals, where an escort from India handed me a toddler and said, good luck. And I was a mother. And all the pictures I have of myself at that time are terrified. And again, beautiful and terrible things. It was a very, very difficult transition to go from being a working artist in a studio or a graduate student to all of a sudden staying home with a baby. And this was my studio. This is also my kitchen. And you can see the chaos of my life at that time. And I'm sure that many of you who are mothers and who have creative vocations can really identify with this feeling. Oh, this is my daughter painting. And I had imagined being a mother that my life would be filled with creativity and mess and in these beautiful adventures in creativity. And it turned out that as a mom, I didn't really like doing this that much. And I felt very ashamed and disappointed in myself. So I moved my studio out of the kitchen into the garage. And here's an image of St. Vincent. And in his arms, he has an infant, as he was one who rescued orphans. And one of my dear friends, her baby came over to pose for this. So I love that I got to capture him at that moment in his life, because they're small for a really short time. And here, so during this time, I was not able to work on a lot of commissions, but I did start an arts organization in town. And here, my daughter and I are walking to art camp, and we have all of the art supplies. And again, this sense of like creative integration with my family and my studio often felt at odds. And then every now and again, I would feel this intersection, and it felt very exciting to me. Here we are posing for an article in the newspaper because we were going to open up an art center in Grove City, Pennsylvania, where we lived a short time. And I just loved this image. It was below 20 degrees. It was so cold that day, and we were waiting for the photographer. And it just spoke to me of me and my daughter and a sculpture, and sort of integrated on this bench. I imagined this would be my life. as a mother. And every now and again it was. And I have a child who can look at artwork, and I've been dragging her through museums since she was small. But it turns out she doesn't really enjoy art museums as much as I hoped. And she is very much her own person, and she has her own interests. And here's a sculpture I did of her when she was small. It's difficult to get her to sit down in the studio these days, as she's a teenager. Then in 2017, everything in my life came to a halt. I was diagnosed with cancer, and I underwent surgery and chemotherapy and radiation. And I pretty much laid on the couch for a year. And during that year, I had the opportunity to experience unconditional love. So the people who came to care for me had nothing to gain from me. They only could give, and I had nothing to give back. So it was really a tremendous turning point for me in my life as I experienced unconditional love of God and through other people. I did this self-portrait, sort of thinking about these beautiful, those French aristocrats, but here I was stripped down. You can see the port in my chest, and I had no hair, and sort of the contrast of that humiliation and the haughtiness of those French portraits. So after the doctor gave me the okay, I was going to live life. I was going to carpe diem. I flew to Paris. Even with all these medical bills and debts, I thought I cannot live another day without being in Paris. And I just really kind of sucked out the marrow of life during this time as I healed. And it took me years to really feel myself again. And then it was the pandemic. So here's a portrait I did of myself wearing a mask. So life kind of fell apart again. But during the pandemic, I was working on a huge monument to fashion designer Claire McCardle. And here I'm in the studio with, you can kind of get a sense of scale at how big it was. So during the pandemic, I worked in the studio, and I came home and we homeschooled, and we spent time outdoors, and we built things with sticks in the backyard. We went on an epic adventure. We had the sculpture cast in Colorado. So I brought my family, and we went hiking in the mountains, and we learned about how bronze is made. And we went on this wonderful road trip across the country with a big sculpture of Claire McCardle in the back. And here she is. We unveiled her at the end of 2021. And there's Claire McCardle at dawn. And I was on top of the world at this time. I was given a commendation from the city. I really could do no wrong. I was in the papers. I was a very public person. And then everything kind of dried up. And this past year has been really quiet as we've tried to find our normal again. And yet I am on Saturday flying to France, and I'm going for an artist residency where I don't have to worry about making dinner or packing lunches. I can just be, and I can just make art. And so I just want to leave you with I have a kind of sort of a collection of wonderful quotes. And I always say, art is not a thing. It is a way. It is a way that I've constructed my whole life. And I've tried to make it integrated for my family. And yet each person in my family is their own person. And, so I can't form my child into an artist. She is her own person. And I try to give space for her to unfurl into who she is. So now I am going to pass the baton to Amy Bornman, and I am going to end this screen share. Thank you so much. Amy? There she is.
There I am.
Passing the baton.
Hi. Thanks so much, Sarah. It was so cool to hear sort of the long and winding road. I'm kind of more at the beginning of my motherhood journey. I've only been a mom for a little over 2 years, so it's a shorter road that I'll be sort of sharing. So I'm going to start also by sharing my screen. Just a second. Hold on. Gotta start the thingy. Okay, so I'm going to read a poem. Your silence like midnight, me lifting my child's body up out of the crib and doing something you've done for me, tenderest mother, every night of my life. I'm sure in the morning, my son doesn't remember me coming to help him fall back asleep. I don't remember you, but I'm certain. I'm certain you rose out of your bed, your fog, your clouds, your sky, and came. So I have tried to poem or write my way through motherhood, and that fails. I've tried to sew or knit or hand stitch my way through motherhood, and that fails too. And I've tried to pray my way through, and that fails, or rather, I fail within it. All that I can do is keep walking and release all my expectations, remain present, and follow the path where it leads. So my name is Amy Bornman. I'm a mother, an artist, a writer, a small business owner, and a person of faith. I'm 29 years old. I live in Pittsburgh, married to my college sweetheart, and we have a 2-year-old. And I'm 26 weeks pregnant with our second baby. So these are the facts of my life, the true things. And in my life as a creative or professional person, I have celebrated what feels like more than my share of success. I've published 2 books. I have 1 book of poetry here and a book about sewing that I co-authored here. And then I have another book of poetry that'll be published this summer. And my sewing pattern business has been more successful than I expected. People read my writing and tell me it means something to them. My children are both healthy. There's so much love and safety. All is well. All is more than well. There's so much good. But how do I feel? I knew that becoming a parent would feel like this explosion in my life, but I really couldn't have known how completely that would feel true in practice. So even in the midst of all of the joy of my life, all the goodness, there's this shattering that is inescapable. In motherhood, I've become acquainted with my desperate self, perhaps for the first time. And as I reflect on the past almost exactly 3 years since I first learned that I was pregnant, which was right in step with the beginning of the pandemic, I feel that I would call my personal transition into motherhood a true path of descent. And I'm not alone in this. So many of the smartest mothers I know echo this song just in their own particular voice. We give birth to children and die a surprising death, just as popular culture would tell us our life is maybe just beginning. So much love, so much newness, but also so much loss and such pure, hard humility. I find myself now at a low point, sort of shivering and looking around and asking, what's next? I'm a writer and a poet. I wrote all of my published or soon to be published poems before my son was born. And really almost all of my professional accomplishments were only accomplished because of work that I completed before his birth. It's really hard for me to work now. And even when I have the time, it's especially hard to make work that feels connected to my art practice. The past 2 years have felt like such undoing. I've become virtuosic at caregiving, at understanding my child's cues and quirks, at loving him in every way that I can. But what else? Do I have anything else to show for these years? And does it matter? In my working life since becoming a parent, I feel that I've been thoroughly unimpressive. In my business, I've still done things I'm proud of, things that were able to be sold and marketed like they were made by a normal, intact person. And that's because these things are effectively my day job, and I have forced them out of my meager hours of childcare like honey from a rock. But in my artist life, for which I am rarely paid, things are less tidy. I have done so much work, written so much since I became a mother, poems and essays, and also half of a draft of a novel. But to me, it all has this quality of something written very late at night, like the dregs of a dream, where you try to understand the scribbles in the morning and they only halfway make sense. In my estimation, the artist in early motherhood exists as a sort of madwoman, scribbling or painting or sewing, like her life depends on it, when really she should be sleeping or eating or taking a shower. Why do I do it? Because I must. And because I'm afraid. I'm afraid I will lose it if I let go. What is hard to say is that God has felt similarly grasped at and barely held on to in these past years. Motherhood feels intrinsically linked to spiritual crisis for me. I gave birth and dipped straight down into my first ever crisis of faith. And in some ways, motherhood has felt like a long, dark night of the soul. And that kind of feels entirely appropriate. There's so much night that I have been witness to. I have the kind of kid who has really still never slept, who has always needed lots of help to fall and stay asleep. So that means I've spent so many dark hours awake and walking around my house. So for my soul, a literal dark night and a figurative one. I felt my life crack open when my son was born. And along with it, my understanding of who God was and how things worked. We named our son Thomas before I even realized that his birth would deliver intense doubt. And I'm still there. The only image that I can really connect to now is that of a God who is a mother with everlasting arms, carrying me around a dark bedroom all through the night until I stop fighting sleep, until I stop fighting this transition, all my confusion and discomfort, and welcome rest. That is the beginning and the end of my relationship with God, as things are right now. So big and so small at once. I feel that perhaps I have the same awareness of God that an infant has of their mother. Sensation, knowing before language, gentle support of the body, nourishment that appears and disappears as if from nowhere. So different than where I found myself at other times in my life. My faith has always been so intellectual, so contemplative, so logical, rooted to a list of tasks or goals. It used to make sense. And now all of that has vanished, and I am small and soft and desperate for sleep. So now another night poem, a variation on the one that I read at the start. And underneath are the everlasting arms. For a while, I held him until he slept, every day, many times a day, held him as he fell into sleeping, as he settled and quieted and breathed soft and long. All day, all night, anytime he needed sleep, I was there to welcome him into it. I wish he could remember that I did that, but he won't. I wish I could remember my mother doing that for me. Only a baby can need so much, trust so keenly, be so opaquely grateful and unremembering, both at once. I believe there have been everlasting arms underneath me every day, many times a day. I wish I could remember you too. I'm still so deep in the bodily experience of early motherhood, the physicality of parenting a 2-year-old, the complete bodily surrender of pregnancy and my upcoming second birth, which I can't stop thinking about. I just weaned my toddler a few weeks ago. I have to give birth again so soon, and then there'll be a newborn again and an explosion of my life again. It is all so intense. I can't get over the intensity. But I have to ask myself, where will I be after all this intensity, when it is less physical, less total, when even a little bit less of me is implicated? What will I find when I have a little more space for contemplation, for this return to myself? I have to see this as an essential passage, a sort of Red Sea. Of course, my life is in this middle place too, but I have to imagine that there will be an after, just as there is a before that feels so vivid in my mind. And what then? I guess I'll find out. I believe that the thousands of hours of caregiving are adding up to something very beautiful, but it is slow and murky. I feel myself to be a different person than I was before, someone stronger, more gentle, less selfish, more sure. But there are also parts of me that I deeply miss. My child self, the part of me who's needy, who wants to take up space, who's had to be so quiet, so brave, so patient in motherhood. I know that part of me will never go away, but I wish I had more space to allow some of the nurturing to overflow back into myself. The artist in me knows that those soft parts need such careful tending, such earnest listening. What if I can't do that right now? What art can I make then? I don't know. All I can do is keep embracing my life exactly as it is. I don't want to speed time up. I want to stay here in my life in all its littleness and exhaustion, with my children and myself, and with the God who carries me, who I am barely aware of beyond the knowledge that somehow I am nourished, somehow I am sleeping, somehow I am awake. The art that I make in this season sings that murky song, sings unknowing, sings dissent, going deeper and deeper towards some soft, warm center where everything is love. So now I would like to pass it off to Sarah Hart, our last panelist, and we will go from there.
Hello, thank you, Amy. That was so beautiful. I have so enjoyed listening to the two Amys and Sarah. It's been amazing, and it's very lovely to see all of you today, even though I can't see everybody here. I apologize in advance for my horrible background. I am a musician. I am on the road at the Marriott. It's not very creative or beautiful. My name is Sarah Hart. I'm from Nashville, Tennessee, via Southeastern Ohio, where I grew up. And if you want to find out about me, just go to sarahhart.com. I thought today really what I wanted to do, I don't have any slides to show you. I just want to look into your beautiful faces, and I want you to hear my heart. I am a mom of two daughters who are now 20 and 22 years old. So I have made it. We have made it through. And I just want to share with you what in my life has worked in terms of mothering and creativity. And I hope just to simply be an encouragement to you today, because I know that this life of art and momming is definitely not easy. And so I'm going to give you sort of my tips to how I made it work and how I kind of continue to make it work. Many years ago, I was writing a women's retreat, and I called my mother because I wanted a quote on motherhood. And I was like, Mom, can you give me a quote on motherhood? I need something great. She's like, ooh, a quote on motherhood. And she thought about it, and she's like, mistakes were made. That was her quote. And my children were very small, and I was like, that is a terrible quote. So anyway, I hope to give you some advice too, and we will circle back to mistakes were made. But here are the things that have worked for me as a creative and a mom. And I hope that you can take these to heart. The number one point is this: embrace the chaos. Learn to embrace the chaos in your life with your children. I guess, how do I say that? Well, everything is always going to be chaos. And Sarah talked a little bit about that. You don't have to clean up the Legos every night. Sometimes the dishes can sit in the sink. You have to understand that the life that you have entered into is a battlefield, and the life of art is already a battlefield. And then when you add kids to the equation, it's just even more of a battlefield. So if you do not embrace the chaos, you're never going to be able to be an artist, because it's part of our art. The second thing that worked for me always very well is that I always scheduled my creativity. Now, I know that's very counterintuitive for artists to say, ugh, I have to schedule my creativity. But listen, it was the best thing that ever happened to me. As a songwriter, living in Nashville, we had this awesome thing called Mom's Day Out. And from the time my babies were 6 months old, I would take them to Mom's Day Out twice a week. And for 5 hours a day, I had creative time. That 10 hours a week was sacred to me. And I always used it to write songs, always. And I learned not just to, make sure that I was scheduling creative time, but I also learned how to get very good at my craft very quickly, because I only had 5 hours a day to do it twice a week. So it's important to look at our creativity like a job and not be afraid or embarrassed about scheduling time to be creative. It works, I promise you. Number 3, know that sacrifices will be made. And I want to say this very truly, not just sacrifices by you, but sacrifices by your family. I travel, music makes me travel all the time. And I traveled a lot of weekends when my babies were small. And one weekend I came home from a trip, I walked in the door and I picked up my little girl who was about 4 and I hugged her tight. And she was so skinny and so little, like a little bird. And I'm hugging her and kissing her. And she whispers in my ear, "Mommy, do you love me more than music?" I've never forgotten that. And of course, no amount of me saying, "Baby, of course, you are my world," is going to make me stop feeling guilty. Sometimes that's part of it, you know? So know that sacrifices will be made by yourself, by your family, but that those sacrifices are holy, and honor the sacrifices that your family is making for your art. Find ways to honor them whenever you are able in the in-between. Love them with your all and honor their sacrifice. The fourth thing for me was this: I always tapped into my children's imagination. Oh my gosh, I don't know how many times I played Barbies and American Girl and Legos. And I did that, you know, because that's what moms do, but also because that was feeding my artistic soul. I cannot even tell you how many songs have been written in my repertoire because of spending time with my little ones, listening to their words, watching the way they play, watching the way that they interact with each other, and being allowed in that time myself to play, to have an imagination. And that was so incredibly important for me in the writing process and in the musical process. There were many times I'd be playing and say, "Mommy's got to go away for 5 minutes." And I would just write something down on a piece of paper real quick, come back and play, and then come back to that later, because their imagination reminded me that I have an imagination too. And that inner child in me has not gone anywhere. It's still there. And that's one of the amazing gifts that children are. They rekindle that in you. Number 5, because I have 2 daughters, this has always been very important to me. And for those of us who are moms and women, I do not think we think about this enough, but I've always taught them, no is a powerful word. For the creative mom, for the creative life, no is the most powerful word that you have in your repertoire. And I think that we are tempted always to say yes to everything, you know, because most of us who are artists are very excited about art and very excited about life and very excited about opportunities. But sometimes knowing our limits and knowing that it's okay to put the kibosh on it and say, "No, I can't do that. I just can't. I can't." That is okay. And there is a holiness and a sacredness in that. I just was talking to my daughter last week and I was saying this to her, "What's the most powerful word?" And she said, "No." So really embracing that and knowing our own limitations is important. So just to talk about momming real quick from my perspective now as a mom who is a creative, but whose children are grown and on their own, is this. Number 6 for me: your kids will be fine. Relax. If I could tell this to my younger self, I would. I was so stressed out when I was a younger mom, but the truth is the kids will be fine. If you pour into them your love, your care, your compassion, your mercy, your creativity, your artistry, if you pour all of that into them, I promise they will be fine. So relax, let your guilt go, let your stress go, relax into the art of motherhood. It is imperfect. And in its imperfection, it is pure beauty. Number 7, this has been important for me. And this has to do more with our children, but also with our art. Accept, that's a big word. Accept, y'all, accept. Accept that it will likely never turn out the way you thought, or even the way you hoped. And that is an important one. That's not to say be a negative Nelly and say, "Oh, it's never going to be the way I want." It's just to say, accept the fact that your children will probably never be the people you hoped they would be, or do the things you hoped they would do. Sarah touched on that a little bit too. It is not your life, it is their life. They're going to become their own people. So accept that they are going to become their own people, and accept that the vision that you have for them probably isn't going to be the way it's going to look. I know it hasn't been for me and my children, and yet my children are amazing and beautiful and wonderful citizens, and I love them. But definitely their lives took a curve that I might not have chosen for them, right? And the same is true of our art. We have to accept that it probably is going to be 1,000 times different in the end game than we ever imagined. I am still learning. Ancora imparo. I am still learning. And each and every day I accept that it is not the journey that I thought it would be. You know, when I was a kid, I wanted to be a rock star. And here I am, just doing music and piecing it all together and making the artistry work. So accept that it will be different. In the beginning, the quote was said, all shall be well, and all shall be well, and all manner of things shall be well. Just last week, I was in the UK, and I've been wanting to go all my life. I finally had the opportunity to visit the cell of Julian of Norwich. I wish I had a slide for you, but standing in that cell, standing in that place, I thought about this, how Julian herself accepted. She just accepted things as they were, when they came, as they came. She had no choice because she was walled into this little cell. But in this little cell came the first book written by a woman in the English language, right? In these thoughts that she had, in these visions that she had of God. And her artistry was born in that place. So as we remember that all shall be well, I remember that all shall be well, and I accept it, that all shall be well. And the last thing is this, the last thing I want to share today. It's very important. I look back in my life and I see where I did not do this and how it hurt my heart. So I encourage you each and every day to give yourself grace. Be gracious to you. God is so gracious. God is so loving. God is so kind and compassionate. And would it be that we could have the same grace and compassion for ourselves as artists, as mothers, as people who make mistakes. Circling back all those years ago to my mom, and I thought that was such bad advice. Mom, really? Mistakes were made. But now, yes, mistakes were made. And I see how those mistakes were beautiful and how those mistakes were all little brushstrokes that painted in the picture of my life and still continue to paint. And mistakes will still continue to be made. And each and every day, I will still wake up and say, thank you, God. Help me to have faith for one more day. And I will try very hard to have grace for myself as a mom who loves her children and doesn't always get it right. Grace for myself as an artist who loves her art and doesn't always get it right. And grace for myself as a human being, a beloved daughter of God. And I hope that you see yourself in that too. It's been wonderful to talk to you. And I'm going to pass it back to Jess and to Mia.
Wow. This has been so good. So good. As I was listening to each of you speak, I was just caught by so many of these descriptive words that you were using in your presentations and in your statements of, and in my mind, it wove together just this image and a process of motherhood and creativity. We hit on pilgrimage from Amy Alznauer, talked of her life as a pilgrimage, motherhood as a pilgrimage. And then hearing from Sarah and Amy about this terrible and the beautiful, this intertwining, and that mistakes were made, like Sarah was saying, and Amy, just this embodiment of the early stages of motherhood. All of this is a development. All of it is a process, and the beauty that is intertwined. So I just feel so honored to hear your stories and how it touched on the hand, the heart, the mind, the soul, how that just integrated on its own. But I'm curious, as I was listening, for each of you, was there a significant moment or a time when you felt, I cannot mother without my creativity? And we'll just go around as we did in the beginning, starting with Amy Alznauer, and then you'll pass it off as you did before. And just, share your thoughts on that.
Well, just to begin with, there's so many moments like that throughout mothering. And I feel like Amy's sort of descent, it was such a beautiful articulation of what happens. And I don't think it happens for everyone. Like you said, I do think it happens very commonly in creative women, or women that are using their minds in some way, like academics. I'm around a lot of academics because my husband's a philosophy professor. So I think that absolute change from the contemplative space that you're used to into this craziness, in this chaos, and this other person's constant need that isn't articulate yet, that has no language, is a really jarring change. And honestly, like I've gone in and out throughout the years of mothering, having periods where I feel like I am negotiating that well, and times when I'm not. And I think recently in the past few years, I think ever since the pandemic is really how I can trace it. My daughter was in school, my son and daughter were in school, and then they were both home. And then my son went back to school and my daughter's still home. And I feel like that period of homeschooling has been really challenging, not because I am so much the one involved, because she does a lot of independent courses, she in various co-ops, et cetera, but because there's somebody always with me. And I have come to realize that I need actual solitude, not just time where I can go into the other room and people will leave me alone, but actual, like, nobody's around, including animals, right? Like nobody's around. And very recently, my husband kind of, thankfully, I have a husband like this, but realized this was going on in my life and has restructured. We both restructured our lives. So I'm now getting like 3 days in a row to work and be alone. And that has been really hugely beneficial to me. And I start to realize that if I don't have that time, then I'm not really even functioning well as a mother. So not just that I'm not creating, but that I'm not able to give of myself anymore. I just sort of enter this perpetual haze that doesn't have enough joy in it, and doesn't have even enough creativity in it to manage. I mean, motherhood is such a creative thing, as we've all said. So yeah, I'm always dealing with that.
I'm almost like in all these thoughts, almost losing the question a little bit. When I first became a mom, oh my goodness, Amy Bornman, when you were talking about I call that time the shattering, is, so like when you're speaking to my soul, and my daughter's now in high school. So like remembering that time, I have all these cute pictures of her. And so like it's starting to be happier memories. But when I enter into that, like, what was it really like? And I had planned to take some time and just be a full-time stay-at-home mom. And so when she arrived, the abruptness of adoption was really shattering for me. It was, literally somebody handed me a 2-year-old in an airport, a 2-year-old who didn't know who I was, a 2-year-old who didn't speak, who didn't walk, who didn't hug, who didn't know how to, she drank from a cup she didn't use. And so had a newborn who was also tearing my house apart. So I didn't have a studio set up or anything. And I found myself, so it's almost like the creativity was being contained and it was like bursting out in weird ways. Like I would stay up all night and paint walls. I painted my kitchen cabinets one day when my husband was at work, and he was like, "How did you do this?" And I would make these elaborate meals. Like I remember getting rye berries and grinding them by hand and cultivating yeast and baking this sourdough rye. And I made my own crackers. And fortunately, I have a very supportive husband who, again, met me while I lived in a garage. And I'm like, this is who I am. Okay. I live in a garage and I make statues. And we talked about sending her to daycare. And I was raised by a stay-at-home mom who's an extraordinary stay-at-home mom. I never went to daycare. We never had babysitters. And I remember dropping her off, and I would just sit in the parking lot and cry. And for months, and she only went twice a week. Anyhow, but she started having a really good time and really enjoyed this time. And so the crying was a little bit less and a little bit less. And I allowed myself that space for contemplation. And I've had a morning pages practice. I'm sure most of you are familiar with morning pages. So very quickly, everyone in my house learned, don't talk to mom until she's done writing. So that helped me a lot. And then the Christians in the Visual Arts did a Doing Good Well, kind of, I guess, a conference. It was like a long weekend where all these mother artists came and gathered for a long weekend. It was the first time I'd been away from her, and it sort of like awakened my soul. But sculptures would pop up. Like I was in the basement. We had like a gross basement, and then they were all over the counters. It was like I just couldn't not be that person. Like I just couldn't. And I felt like if I didn't make stuff, I was going to die. Like it felt that extreme to me. And as my daughter's gotten older and she's been in and out of school and homeschool, we've tried to find different ways to give that solitude and that space, even if I'm not bringing in money, to make that sacrifice in other places, to have that time. And it's ebbed and flowed. And now that she's in high school, I thought I would have all this time, and that is a lie. So the high school years are demanding in really different ways and invite us to be present in ways that I didn't expect. So part of the reason I'm going for a residency, I'm going to go away for a month, and I'm still going to be a mom, of course, but I'm not going to do any of the job. I'm going to go be in France, and I'm just going to make art. So I'm absolutely terrified. So thank you, Sarah, for letting me know that she will be fine. My family will be fine. It's going to be fine. So
yeah, I agree. I love that we ended with Sarah's advice from the other side. It really was very meaningful. So
yes,
yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
You know, I was thinking one other thing I just want to throw in here, between Amy Bornman's time and I guess Sarah Hempel Irani and my time, that's like about 10 years, a little more. And then between our time and your time, it's about 10 years. And that's so short in some sense, like a decade, but it's still so long when you're living it. So it's just nice to have that spread here.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's so true. And I wish I could tell young mothers how fast it goes, because when you're in it, it feels like it's forever. You're in one day and you're like, oh my God, this is the longest freaking day, and if you can hit the pillow and nobody's dead, like it's a good day. Right. So, but then when you're where I am, you're like, I blinked and it's gone. I did want to say one thing to the question that you asked, Mia. I think that we as mothers, I know this about myself, we as mothers fail to see ourselves as witnesses in our children's lives. We see ourselves as moms, we see ourselves as disciplinarians, we see ourselves as cooks and laundresses, but we fail to see ourselves so many times as witnesses. And as a mom who has her kids on the other side, my oldest daughter is at UCF majoring in theme park management. She works at Universal Studios, extremely creative girl. My youngest daughter is a theater major. Extremely beautiful, brilliant artist, costume designer, set designer, actress. So I think that we need to remember our creativity is a witness to our children. And if we can help them grow into the people that they're going to be through our creativity, we can't feel any, shame about it. But I think we need to be thinking of ourselves as that, instead of guilting ourselves about, the art takes away from my time with my kids and my kids take away from the time with my art. Instead of doing that, just embracing it all and saying, I'm going to be a witness. This is who mommy is. Mommy, as you said it, Sarah, mommy would die if I couldn't do this. And I always say, like, I don't know what my life would look like without music. I can't separate being a musician from me. There's no way I could picture myself as an accountant in a cubicle. I can't do it, and it's the same. That's a witness to our children to say, this is who God has made me to be. And they are intertwined, and God will show you who you are made to be, and it will be intertwined. And it's a beautiful thing.
Yeah, it is so interesting to be sort of the pregnant / toddler parent in this discussion, because there's just so much encouragement to hear that, to hear the witness that your creativity has been a witness to your children. Because I think for me, I am in that, the days feel like they last forever time, which I don't want to speed up. But I think to answer sort of the question you asked, Mia, I think one of the things that's most difficult for me about this season of motherhood is that so many of the things that I have to do require so much force. I have to keep moving, do all the diapers, chase the toddler, soothe the tantrum. There's just so much action. And so it's almost startling when, because also I have a day job that also kind of, it's a creative day job, but there's still a level of force where you're like, okay, I have the deadline, I have to finish this thing. There's all this action. So whenever I can kind of suddenly switch into flow, which almost always comes as a surprise, because the projects the art doesn't come easily anymore because of how tired I am. So if the idea comes, the poem or the essay or the weird novel I'm writing, if it comes and I can feel that flow, it's almost it's a strange feeling to release that feeling of force and tension and just be like, oh my gosh, I'm I'm in flow. I'm flowing. And I think a lot about one of Rilke's poems says, let what I do flow from me like a river, no forcing and no holding back, the way it is with children. So I see my son in flow so much, just like playing with his cars, feeling himself, like doing his thing. He's in flow so often. And as his mother, I feel like I'm so often just forcing my way through my day. So when I can somehow, as if by magic, shift into flow and make something that makes me feel like myself, that connects me back to just some sort of essential inner child, that flow like children, it really, really does help me mother. Like it helps me relax. And I think the inner child piece is really so important, especially when you're parenting young children, because you have to let the child be so big, but then you're big too. You're still this little child that needs to take up space. So art has been a way for me to do that.
It's so beautiful, Amy. And, I will say, like, even now as a mom whose kids are grown, that sense of childlike play and imagination, the moment that's lost, we all become crappy artists. I mean, that's just the truth of it. So the moment our adultism or our intellect overtakes our ability to imagine, especially for, any of us, but poets and songwriters, a lot has to do with what can I completely imagine and make out of nothing. And I think that's really crucial. That's a really crucial piece. So don't lose that. Don't lose that. Tap into it when it's happening. Tap into it.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I would like to add that, when I show my portfolio or share my story, it looks like, there's been a lot of success and a lot of really enormous sculptures and awards. And I started a nonprofit, but that's like viewing it up here. There's so many days where I know I write in my morning pages, I don't know how I'm going to get through this day. I'm so exhausted. Or it's just a grocery list. Like, I don't know what we're going to have for dinner tonight. And in fact, yesterday or the day before, I wrote a blog post about this event. And it was like, I kind of started talking about what I was going to talk about and about the event. And then I added a recipe and I didn't even finish the paragraph. And I'm like, yeah, that sounds about how life is. It's like, I'm here and I'm here. And there's long stretches where I didn't really do anything. I mean, this year I've started a few things and I've been rejected for a lot of grants and calls. But again, when you zoom out, you're like, wow, what a career. And so it's like when we see people on Instagram, people are like, your life is amazing. I'm like, yeah, well, I don't show pictures of myself crying. I don't show pictures. It's just the highlight reel. So anyone's portfolio, anyone's CV, it's the highlight reel. And I think it helps to know that we're all struggling. We're all in this, and it's hard. It's really hard. And nobody can prepare you for how hard it is.
Yeah, that's so true. And Sarah, I just want to say what a witness that is to your child. Like me having doors shut in my face and failing. It's important for your kids to see that. It's important for our young people to know half of life is failing. We fall down and we get up. That's how the saints are made. We fall down and we get up. And it's important for them, for your daughter to see that in you. And I'm so with you. That's what I hate about Instagram, because everything looks all hunky-dory and it's you, the 80% of it is the struggle and the heartache and the difficulty.
Absolutely. I see that somebody's asked a question about our partners and our spouses. And I would like to give a shout out to mine because he's incredible. Some of the ways, and I often don't feel like he understands me. And I'm like, I throw myself on the couch. I'm very dramatic. And he's just like, I see you. And again, I keep bringing up the garage thing, but he's like, I know who you are. And the person that I asked to marry was this sculptor living in a garage, doing her thing. And, currently, and this feels embarrassing, like I have a tiny house and I don't even feel like I have a real job. And I have someone come clean my house every second week. But it's been years of saying, oh, can we get that? That would make my life so much better. I've done HelloFresh or these meal deliveries, and I'm a great cook and I love to cook. And sometimes I just can't do it all. And I've sent my child to daycare. And, this year I really enjoyed homeschooling and we all decided that, she wanted to go to public high school, and that was really hard. And I sent her to do that. And so I think the one thing that cancer really taught me was accepting care. And I do think as communities, we need to do better with caring for one another. And it's easier to care for people who are in a crisis than people who are sort of in this long crisis of parenting. But accepting help, like, it is okay. You need help. We all need help. And, you know, my spouse, I remember when she first arrived, someone mentioned him babysitting, and he was like, no. This is my child. I'm spending time with my child. And so I think when our partners adopt a position of, it's not a wife's job to do all the care, it is our job. It's our house. And he often says that, thankfully, within earshot of my daughter, it is our home. It is our family. It is our dog. It is our child. And I think adopting that as a way of being, you know, but sometimes, you know, he works long hours, and sometimes that's a lot for him too. So we try to kind of, you know, do in a way that works for us, not in a prescribed way.
I wanted to speak to that just a tiny bit too. As I said, my husband's super supportive, but one of the things that I found really challenging is the parent community that I have found myself in, particularly when you're in a homeschooling community. There's a lot of mothers who have pretty much turned their lives over, and I'm not faulting this in any way, shape, or form, but for some of them, it's extremely life-giving, turned their lives over to being homeschooling mothers. And I've experienced a lot of guilt in this sort of comparison between the way I want to live my life or need to live my life versus how these other choices that I've seen around me, because really all of us need narratives. All of us need paths that have been walked before us in order to figure out how to live our own lives. So one of the things I did recently is I signed up for a conference at Northwestern where I teach, that was actually for academics, to how to get more work done. And it was really wonderful for me to be around academic women who had, because I really live my life much more like that than I do like a homeschooling mother. And so it was wonderful to be around women who really did feel that the work they were doing was important and that they needed to find ways to do it. One of the things I absolutely love that you said, Sarah, Hart, was, and I don't know if I've ever heard somebody say this before, was the idea that sacrifices will be made, and not just your own, but your family sacrifices, and that's holy. I love that. That is such a beautiful and really important thing to understand. And I really don't know if I understood it until, like, this was really a moment of revelation for me to hear you say that. Because, you know, I'm very aware of the sacrifice. I've been traveling a ton lately because of this exhibit I'm doing at Emory University. I'm going to be leaving again this week, the fourth time since Christmas. And every single time my whole family has to, like, rally, do all the work that I normally do. And it's just beautiful to think that that is not a bad thing, that sacrifice that everybody is making is a beautiful thing and a good thing. So thank you very much for that.
Amen. Amen to that. Well, thank you. And it's true. And I think all of us finding ways to honor our families is so important. And I will say this about my husband. He's my best friend in the world. And I call him my soft place to land, because life on the road is very hard. And my life is just a ball of chaos. And I literally haven't been home for 4 weeks. I'm still on the road. I haven't been home for 4 weeks. And when I get home, it's as if everything in my body just goes, and I sit on the sofa beside him and I cry usually because we all need a soft place to land. For those of us who are creatives and unmarried, I just want to say, you know, find a friend, a parent, somebody in your life who can help you be a soft place for you when you need it, because all artists and thinkers are chaos people who crash at some point, and you need someone to help you when you crash. Whoever that is, make space for someone in your life. Accept that you will need that. And just to speak to Sarah's point, it's so funny. I do a lot of traveling concerts and ministry and stuff like that. And I can't tell you how many times always a woman has come up to me and said, "Where are your children?" You know, because I'd be away on the weekends and I'd talk about my kids from stage, and "Where are your children?" "Well, they're home with my husband." "You let your husband have your children?" And my answer was always, well, he is responsible for half of this. Like, I think there's something that a lot of women out there still think that they are relegated to being the one who has to care for the children, and to understand that our guys are responsible for half of this, and so they should be, and we should not have any guilt feelings about that. That's good. And I know that my being away weekends, the relationship that my husband has with my daughters is extremely close and beautiful because I was gone. And if I had been there and in the way, I think they would have a much different relationship. And it took me years to understand, he's not doing it wrong. He's just doing it differently than I would do it when I'm gone. So, so I don't know, but my husband's been my rock of Gibraltar. I don't know who I would be without his love, to be quite honest.
Yeah. And I think sometimes again, to speak from the very different place of the beginning, I'm pregnant right now. My husband can't be pregnant, and he can't carry all of that. It's intense and it's physical, and I can't share it with him. He can't give birth to this child. Similarly, my toddler right now, just over 2, is in a really, really intense clinging to mom phase. So as much as my partner would love to swoop in and do so much of the caregiving, he works outside the home. I am self-employed, so I am sort of the primary home person, though I do have moments of childcare where I am supposed to be working. As much as my husband would love to, I'm going to do back time, sometimes my toddler simply says, no, it will not be you, it will be mom. And so it's so hard to have that value of having this partner that wants to be a full partner, and then having these literal, just he can't be pregnant. And sometimes the toddler just makes it very clear that right now I need my mom. And I think in that moment, just having the partner as witness has helped me feel like, okay, this is temporary, and at least somebody is seeing me and being in this moment with me when it is truly imbalanced, and it's too heavy on me, in this time. We can both see that and know that. And even just having somebody say, yeah, it's too heavy on you. And, I'll do everything I can to fix that. But it's just, there's some of it that can't be fixed. But I think too, in that, having other support really helps too. Having what has really helped me is having structure, having, we live near my mom and she watches my kid. We have this close friends and kind of a little play group that we do, these things to depend on, where it's a moment of ease on my kind of burden. Really helps even beyond that partnership dyad, knowing that there's moments where I will be witnessed by others too, I think.
And the older moms, when I was where you are, Amy, the older moms in my life were it's not going to be like this forever. And I really did not believe them. And here I am, with a high schooler who's stop touching me, leave me alone, sort of thing. And then, oh, mommy, I love you. It's a natural push and pull of where they're trying to separate, and it's difficult in a different way. But it really doesn't last forever. And yeah. And again,
one day your kid's going to call you and be like, I'm going to Iceland this weekend, which is what my daughter did to me 2 weeks ago. You will have no control.
What a day that will be.
It's coming. It'll quicker than you think.
Yeah.
It's okay to be easy on yourself too, and say, it's okay if during these years I don't really get a lot accomplished. And again, that felt painful to me at that time, and I physically could not get a lot accomplished. And I had other ways of being creative, but it was very difficult. And I fought it a lot because I didn't feel like myself. I mean, it was really, like you said, it was very much a shattering. And sometimes I wish that I had other children, because I feel like I could do it better, and it's I have this one child and it's all on her, and she gets all my mistakes and all my celebrations. So, but at the same time, it's easier to have one, because it's easier to pack up and travel. It's easier to find childcare for one person. It's there's no there's no one way to do this. And thankfully we're all very creative, try to figure this out.
Yeah,
Well, and I
I'm
do
one.
think
Oh,
that-
go ahead. Sorry.
No,
No,
I'll
go
just
ahead,
say
Amy.
one thing. Kind of, I do think it is so interesting to be confronted kind of by your own inability to accomplish things in maybe the early years or the more intense seasons of motherhood, where sometimes I have I have a nap time every day, which, how much can you depend on nap time to get essential work done? And then I have about 2 hours of childcare where my mom takes my son out of my house, which is incredible. And I'm alone. But, every day I'm like, okay, during these 2 hours, I'll do this and I'll do this and I'll do this and I'll do this and I'll get all these things done and I'll finish that sewing pattern. And then sometimes I literally just have to sit and stare into space or like eat a bowl of cereal or like, sometimes I can't even get there to the things that I hoped I would do in that time. And I see that as like, there's this whiplash between the caregiving and then the making. And sometimes I really can't get there and I have to give myself so much grace and allow myself to just be a person resting, like.
And that is
that's really
okay.
awkward. Yeah.
That's part of the process. I mean, letting ourselves have time to eat a bowl of cereal and stare into space for an hour and not feel guilty about it is part of the process. I mean, motherhood kills brain cells, let's face it. So maybe that's just your time to like rejuvenate your brain cells and you need that too.
Yeah. This is my brain cell growing moment.
Yes, I think, and this is actually speaking to several people's questions in the Q&A here, but I'm wondering, I'm trying to kind of weave some of these questions together, but if all of you kind of at your different places that you are, have there been like certain things that you've sort of gravitated towards, or like that thirst that Amy Alznauer is speaking to that kind of propels you towards those questions that you're seeking, but have there been like little ways that you're able to remind yourself, like how to, like how to puncture the lies that we tell ourselves about our own sort of ability to do the thing that we're trying to do that we know in some moments is like so life-giving, which is why we keep doing it, but also like to push beyond the guilt and then like what we think other people think of us. I really resonated with what you were saying, Amy Alznauer, about kind of having just a different, really different approach to my the way I'm living my life as a mother and a creative. And so I'm wondering if you all have found, whether it's like a practice or even like an image on the wall or just like little reminders for yourself to kind of be able to keep doing this even when it's really hard.
I'm almost embarrassed to say this out loud, but when I was first a mom, I was very guilty all the time. Everything felt guilty. I should be able to do this. I should be this way. I should enjoy making art with my kid. I should. And when I went to that Doing Good Well thing, it was 4 days and I felt so guilty about leaving my child. And I would ask myself, if I were a man, would I feel guilty about this? And I'm like, my husband goes on business trips and he doesn't seem to like, rent his clothes and throw himself on a pyre. He's just like, well, this is business. I got to go do this. And so I started asking myself, what if I were a man, would I feel guilty about sending my child to daycare twice a week? If I were a man, would I feel guilty about having a vocation in addition to being a mother? And I think some of that is social conditioning of what a mother should be. And I don't do a very good job fitting into, boxes. And I don't think any creative person does. And so when I was like, this is how a woman should be, I'm like, well, that's really doesn't fit me at all. So I started asking myself those questions. And then when I sort of broke the spell of that mommy guilt, don't get me wrong, I am leaving my family for a month and I'm like, this is a long time. And I'm appreciating the sacrifices of not just my husband, but other people in our community who are showing up. But releasing that guilt, it's a hard thing. It's a really hard thing to do. I don't know if that even answered the question, but release your guilt.
I feel, just to speak a little bit to that, I don't feel like there's ever been one thing that's stuck. There's been many things. And that's one thing I keep reminding myself of recently is that you're never going to get like this one system or this one quotation or this one way of doing things that's always going to work. So it's okay for one thing to work for a while. And then, so, I've experienced it very much as an up and down. Yeah. And this is just, I want to tell you a story very briefly. This past summer was a moment of extreme overwhelm for me parenting, because my daughter decided she wanted to train a wild Mustang. We had to drive, I was in the car 2 hours every day and basically shoveling horse manure, most of the day, doing absolutely nothing creative. And now all of that experience has come into my writing in a way that I didn't anticipate when I was going through it. So I think Sarah Hart mentioned earlier that a lot of the things she did with her children ended up finding a way into her songs. And I think that awareness, if you just hold that awareness that it's not this experience as a creative person, none of your experience is lost, right? It's going to come into your life in some way. So even if it doesn't immediately have that feeling, it eventually will. So it's, I think that realization more than anything is something that kind of helps me move through those really intense periods.
Yeah, I think it really helps me too to keep a small studio space in my home, a physical space. It's in my laundry room. It is not very glamorous. There's not enough natural light. It's, it's not like what I imagined my studio would be. But to just go be alone in that space, to see the little things I've put on the walls, to have this little place that isn't infiltrated by toys and, isn't like a caregiving space, even though it is the laundry room. So it kind of is, but there's something about going there where even if I can't suddenly snap into making the work that I want to make, there is sort of this is the place where feeling of okay, this is the place where I can kind of remember this piece of myself. And so I think if there's any way to kind of carve out a little room of one's own, or a little corner, or a little place, or even a special notebook and special pen, these things that are still just ours, that our child isn't going to ruin or, touch and mess up, claiming those things and having those boundaries of no, you will not come in here. This is my place. That has really helped me, I think, kind of have an easier time getting back into that flow feeling and that self-confidence, I think.
My personal go-to, my entire life, my entire motherhood has always been walking. And I love to walk. I love nature. I love the woods. I grew up in the woods. And for me, it is knowing when to stand up and walk away from the piano, or to set down the guitar, or to get my eyes off the computer and to go and walk in silence with the birds and listen for the voice of God and be reminded that I'm loved and cherished just for me, not because of what I can do, not because of who I am as a mom, not because of anything except that just me, I am loved. And in that walking, that's the one place that I've always gone to my entire life. Even on the road, even if I have to walk outside the crappy Marriott around the parking lot, just to walk and to be away from every other thing that dictates my life, and just to settle into a space. And you're so right. Create a space wherever you can create a space to remind yourself that you're God's beloved daughter before you're anything else, at the beginning and end of every day. That is just crucial to not just a life of art, but a life, just a life.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I'm realizing we're a little bit over time, and I think that's just the perfect place to end, just to continue, thinking about that. But Mia, I was going to let you.
Yeah. Oh, this has been so good. Everything. I just feel like we could talk all day. There's so many things I have oh my gosh, that makes me think of more. But thank you so much to our Amy's and Sarah's today, and for everyone who's come to pop on and ask the questions. We're so moved by your incredible insights and your wisdom, and it's been so good and important and validating. and affirming to so many here. I know that many of those who popped in today have really enjoyed it, and their questions were really coming in, and it's been awesome. Yeah, I don't know, Jess, did you want to?
Sure. Yeah,
Take it
no,
from
thank
here.
you. Definitely. No, thank you. Just want to second Mia's thank you to all of our speakers, Amy Alznauer, Amy Bornman, Sarah Hart, and Sarah Hempel Irani. It's just been such a gift and really like life-giving just to be able to sit here with you and be here with you. And thank you to everyone who joined us for just spending time. I know it's hard to carve out time and for all of your questions. And yeah, I think some of you have been asking a bit about how to have more of this kind of stuff. And so, Mia and I are here if you want to reach out and learn more about what we're doing with Wellspring, a Mother Artist project. It really is still very much a grassroots sort of thing that we're kind of trying to bring into the world in some ways for ourselves, but also to find more of you and connect more with you all. So we just want to say thank you for that. And yeah, we'll be sending out a kind of a post-event follow-up with just details from the event, and then info about, how to tap into more of what we're doing. So yeah, thank you to everyone for being here. It's been just a joy. So
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yes.
Yeah.
All right.
Thank you.